Pleasure to introduce today one of the most interesting members of our diplomatic community here, Ambassador Dino Jalal. Welcome, Salamat Datang. Many of you know him from his years of service, I suspect, as a special advisor on international affairs and presidential spokesman for President Yudhoyono. He served in that position from about 2004 until he was appointed as ambassador last year. We, of course, in Washington know him very well from his earlier career before he was an excellency and as distinguished as he is. He was posted here at the embassy in the early 2000s, late 1990s, early 2000, at a tough time for Indonesia and really did an excellent job reaching out to the business community, NGOs, and many, many others as we move forward for the financial recovery and the transition in Indonesia. But even earlier than that, we have ties here in Washington back to Ambassador Dino and his father, who was one of the most distinguished diplomats in the Indonesian service, an expert on the international law of the sea. And during that time, Dino went to high school in McLean, to McLean High. So we really claim family when we talk about Ambassador Dino here. He brings impressive experience to this post. He served on some of the most challenging assignments and issues in Southeast Asia, ranging from the South China Sea to Timor to Cambodia. He's also worked to establish some of the most interesting initiatives on forestry, a global dialogue on press freedom, security dialogue with the United States, even before we were able to restore military exchanges on a routine basis. And so it'll be interesting to hear his ideas. We're very fortunate to have him this year in particular with Indonesia and the chair of ASEAN and Indonesia taking over APEC as host 2 years hence. So without too much more, I guess I should tell you two more things about Dino before I step down. One, you may not know he is a best-selling author of a book that has now reached 2 million copies. And the other thing I should tell you is he is fortunate to have accompanied one of the most interesting, beautiful, and talented women who are now an important member of our diplomatic community, Dr. Rosa Jalal, who brings great experience in education and dentistry. And so we're very pleased to have not only Dino, but also his better half to be with us while he's here. So without that, let me invite Ambassador Jalal to come up, and we look forward to your remarks. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Jalal.
Thank you, Laura, for that very kind remark. I was a bit flattered when I came here. I saw the room was so full, I said, hey, I'm not doing bad, people are coming to see me. And then somebody whispered, well, that's actually free lunch. So, I've been here for about 6 months, and yesterday, 2 nights ago, I was reminded about how long I've been gone from Washington. I went to a diplomatic reception, and then I saw this guy, and I recognized him immediately. So I went up to him and said, hey, I know you. I used to love watching you in high school in Saturday Night Live. You're a great comedian, great clown. I love you. What have you been doing since, And then he says, I've joined politics now. I'm a senator. Call me Senator Al Franken. So I've been gone that long. Right. So I wish I had told him that I was actually ambassador of Malaysia. But I didn't have to. There's one thing that you didn't tell the audience about me, and this is a bit relevant at the end of just my talk today. It's the fact that actually I started my career at the embassy as a dishwasher, and I'm not joking about this. In 1980, my first job ever when I was 15 was as a dishwasher at the embassy, and this is when I was going to McLean High School, and it was a great place to start. You really learn the value of the dollar. I think this is the time when my dad was DCM at the embassy and asked him for a job. Say, what kind of job I can give you? The only thing open is a dishwasher. He said, hey, you don't want that. I said, try me. And that's how I became a dishwasher. But I'll tell you why that's relevant in the end. I've been asked to speak about reasons about Indonesia's investment environment, and also to update you about the situation in Indonesia. I've been thinking about I know I'm invited here not because I'm ambassador of Indonesia, but because I'm entertainment, I'm dessert, right? So, and I know you've had very serious sessions, so let me just entertain you a little bit. And one of my favorite shows is David Letterman. You know that show. You get to see that show. And the beginning of his show, by the way, David Letterman and me are the same. We're both comedians, except that he gets paid a lot more than I do. But David Letterman has this top 10 list that he does, right? So I think just to make it easier for you, I'm going to tell you the top 10 lists of why you should invest in Indonesia and why Indonesia is a good investment destination. Okay, so reason number 10. Indonesia is now a stable and functioning democracy. I was just having lunch just now before this with Ambassador Robert Gilbert, who was the ambassador in the year, I think 1999, 2000, and he said, Dino, can't believe, I marvel at how much Indonesia has transformed since those days. I thought Indonesia was going to break up and so on and so on, and Indonesia never had a democratic background. We had hundreds of years of being colonized, feudalism, authoritarian government, never had democratic experience. But we are now the strongest democracy in Southeast Asia. We are the third largest democracy in the world, and so on and so on. So kudos to you. Right? So that's one reason, and that leads immediately to issues such as accountability and openness. Being a democracy, we are used to change, we are used to openness and accountability, and in fact, one of the most tremendous political development recently is what we call the quiet revolution, because between 2004 and 2009, every governor, every region, every mayor in Indonesia, we're talking about thousands of them, have been directly elected by the people instead of being appointed. And that turns the political pyramid upside down. It's something that has never happened before, and most remarkably, all happened in a quiet way, in an orderly way, without any bloodbath or conflict. Only a few legal matters, some people who lost complained to the courts, but they were all settled. So we achieved that quiet revolution, which means that our democracy is not just strong at the top, but it's actually a genuine grassroots diplomacy. Secondly, reason number 9, Indonesia has achieved stability. Now, this is a challenge for many countries that are undergoing democratic transitions. There are 3 ways that democracies can go. It can go up, it becomes stronger and more stable. It can stagnate, it doesn't go anywhere really, it doesn't go up or down, right? It sort of stagnates for many years. Or it goes down, it goes into decay, and then it crumbles. And we see many of the examples of the second one and the third one, right? But for Indonesia, alhamdulillah, because we have been able to connect democracy with governance, our democracy now has achieved a point of stability. We've achieved this since 2004. We had a fully functioning, full-term government in the government of President Yudhoyono between 2004 and 2009, and we expect the present government of Yudhoyono will last until 2004 as well. So we've been able to connect democracy with stability, which is a rare and a very difficult achievement for countries undergoing transitions. Reason number 8, Indonesia has lots of resources. Indonesia is very big. Indonesia has 3 time zones, 17,000 islands, if I'm not mistaken, and no, you can't buy any of them. It's not for sale. We got a great deal of biodiversity, both on land and in the sea. We have one of the richest coral triangles. We have 30% of the world's tropical rainforest, which means that 30% of the air you breathe now come from us. And and we give it to you for free. And we are major producers of palm oil, rubber, oil and gas, and so on and so on. So we have tremendous natural resources. In fact, how the president sees Indonesia moving forward is three ways. We have to develop a resources economy, and we have to make sure that resources do not become a curse to our future in the same way that resources have become a curse to others, because it makes you lazy, it stops you from reinventing yourself and things like that. We want to make sure the resources will be applied to eradicate poverty and give us more energy to progress. And also we want to proceed towards the knowledge economy, and then thirdly what my president calls the heritage economy, which means creative industries, batik, on all these things. They cannot be left behind. They have to reinvent themselves and become part of Indonesia's modern economy. So the resources will be pretty much our assets in how we build the future. Reason number 7 on why Indonesia is an important investment destination. We have a lot of young population. We have about 230 million people, and about 50% are below 29 years of age. We just love making babies. Laura mentioned about my wife, and I just got married about 6 years ago, and there was a time when every year I got one baby. You know that, right? My children are 4 years, 5 years, and 6 years old. So we had to go to the doctor and do something to stop that process, right? So, but we have 50% of our of our age are young people, which means we will have in Asia the largest working young productive population. And this is interesting because, as we know, everywhere else the world population is aging. In China, in Japan, in Korea, elsewhere. And you can see it. If I can ask my 2 staff to rise up, Ben and Nabil, can you rise up? I just want people to look at you.
I'm old.
Yeah. See the guy on the left? He looks like he's 15, right? And I'm flattered that you think I belong to that category of 29 and below, but I'm not 29 years old. I'm slightly older than that. Right? And our young population are also very open-minded, very dynamic, very creative. I was very proud recently. I went to see Yahoo in Silicon Valley, and they just bought an Indonesian company, Opro, and it belongs to very dynamic young techies in Indonesia. And I asked them, look, how do they compare to your techies in Silicon Valley? And they said they're as good, or it's not even better. Right. I think this is a part of our new economy that in some sectors the line becomes flat, and everybody starts from the same base, and you can find talents anywhere, no matter what school they go to and what background. And this is an exciting part of our young population. The one thing that I note, and I keep referring this to everybody, is how confident we are about our future. There was a poll recently, in 2009 it was taken actually, asking Indonesians whether or not they have faith in the system, and 85% of Indonesians say they believe the nation is on the right track. 85%. Even though they may not like the president, even though they may hate one political party, even though they may hate certain issues or don't like that issue, but in general, 85% believe the country is in the right direction. After only 10 years of democratic transition, that is no country can ask for a better asset than that. I hope this is something, this precious self-confidence and self-esteem, something that we can keep for a while. The 5th reason, we have a good economic team in Indonesia, in the government. The ministers for finance, industry, the economic coordinating ministers, all the economic parts of the economic team, they're good first-class people. Gita Wirjawan, who's also my good friend, who's been here many times. They're very pro-business. We are committed to a prudent fiscal and monetary policy. Our budget deficit do not go or have not gone over 2%. You know, we are very disciplined. We have a very stingy Minister for Finance, and we love him for that, right? And we're also prepared to give tax incentives for international investors and also domestic investors who are willing to invest in Indonesia on certain key sectors. So I think this economic theme is the reason why the economy has been on an upward path, and that is reason number 4, that Indonesia is on a upward predictable trajectory. And what this means is that there was a time when in the year 2000 and 2001 our economy was only growing at 1% or 2%, and we were afraid that we were in a place of what Indians used to call the Hindu disease, where they were only growing at about 2%, and whatever they did, they could not go over that barrier of 2% growth for so long until they found out how to cure that in the early 90s, and now they are 8 or 9% growth economy. But Indonesia, very steadily, we've gone from 1% growth to 2% growth to 3% growth, and upward to 6%, and then it went down during the global financial crisis to 4.5%, which is not bad. It was the 3rd highest growth next to China and India among the G20 economies, and now we're back to 6%. We're aiming for 6.5%. I think we'll reach 7%. I think my president is being too modest. I believe we can reach 8% by 2014. And that trajectory will continue, I think, because we will expect political stability in Indonesia until 2014 and beyond. And a reflection of that positive upward trajectory is the fact that Indonesia has been included in almost all of the emerging market scenarios for the future. There's this thing called, we are all here but BRICS, Brazil, Russia, Indonesia, India and China, sorry. Are those who are saying, well, there's something else called BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, Indonesia, I'll insert that, China and South Africa. Something else called SHIVETS, this is HSBC CEO, the Colombia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Egypt, Turkey, South Africa. There's something called E7, Brazil, Russia, India, China, plus Indonesia, Mexico, and Turkey. And there's something called the N11. I forget what are these countries, but Indonesia is also part of it. But there's a few more. But the point is, I think in every projections about what are the new emerging economies and who will have very good prospects, Indonesia is always part of these projections. I'm quite pleased with it. I do tell my government that, look, don't be complacent. We're just at the point of good, not yet great. If we think we're great now, we're in big trouble because we got a long ways to go. We got a lot of reforms to make and a lot of promises to keep. Right? Just consider ourselves good, be the underdog, and keep pushing until we become great. You ask me what great is. Great is when our middle class reaches 50 to 60% of population, when we reach about 9 to 10% growth, when entrepreneurs in Indonesia account for 5 to 10% of population, when we become a knowledge economy, right? When we become a fully economy where connectivity thrives throughout Indonesia, and so on, and so on. Now, reason number 4, we have massive domestic market. And we have the largest middle class in Southeast Asia. It keeps growing. I do think that this is one of the most phenomenal economic story of our time. I think the economists just several years ago said that we've crossed the threshold in history because for the first time, more than half of the world population can be classified as middle class. Right? Not middle class in terms of making $60,000 to $100,000 a year, right? But middle class in terms of the amount of money that you make can make you live for your family and have extra income to invest in the future of your children with the factors of prices that work in your country. With my salary when I was back home, I wouldn't even classify as a lower class in America. I would be taking checks from the government. But as a middle class bureaucrat in Indonesia, I was considered middle class because could provide for the family, could send my kids to school, and could make decisions that matter to society. Right. So by that loose definition, half of the world population was considered middle class, and it will keep growing. I'm quite certain by the end of the 21st century, we'll reach 90% or 95% middle class, with the fact that we can probably reach zero poverty, something that no human history has ever reached before by the end of the century. I'm quite convinced, with all these revolutions in information technology, with all these innovations in education and spread of governance, that we can achieve that. But to come back to Indonesia, we have a massive domestic market. Middle class is thriving. Malls are everywhere in Indonesia. During the global financial crisis, you really didn't feel it in Indonesia. And we are growing, we're discovering something new. It's called entrepreneurship. I never grew up with this word. I only discovered this term, in fact, in 2005. Entrepreneurship. But in Indonesia, it's becoming religion now. More and more people are enamored by it. And the psychological and political and economic significance is that people go into universities and they want to create jobs when they graduate, not look for jobs. Right? And it's an amazing spirit. And I think entrepreneurship will be one of the key factors that will unlock the potential of individuals and society in Indonesia. Reason number 3 to invest is Indonesia is just an awesome place to live, visit, work and play. You hear about Bali, just watch the movie Eat, Pray and Love by Julia Roberts, where she went to all these places, but she finally found love and happiness in Bali. Of course, the right man came along with that. So, but Indonesia is a beautiful place. It's sunny and it's warm. A lot of beaches, a lot of good food. People are always smiling, even when people are poor. They have a good heart. It's beautiful people, people with kind hearts and strong family values. And the neighbors are safe. People are open, so it's a really great place to live. I think everybody who's been to Indonesia fall in love with Indonesia. Every diplomat, every ambassador, every business people who work in Indonesia, they left Indonesia. Their heart was always, they always left their heart in Indonesia. So if you don't want to take my word for it, try to experience it by yourself. Reason number 2, governance and bureaucracy reform has been improving quite a lot in recent years. You asked me what are the most difficult sectors of reform. We've had this comprehensive reforms: military reform, electoral reform, parliamentary reform, constitutional reform, legal reforms, intelligence reform, military reforms, governance reform, and so on and so on. One of the most difficult is, of course, bureaucratic reforms, and this is typical among countries undergoing democratic transitions. But this is moving ahead quite well, although not as fast as we want it to be. We have waged the most aggressive campaign against corruption in recent history, in fact, in the memory of our modern Indonesians. And we have a commitment to open market, which means that even during the global financial crisis, in our participation in G20, we've always said that none of this should lead to protectionist measures. Indonesia has been among the strongest countries advocating open economies and keeping up with the process to open up our economy, because that is essential not just to our growth, but to the global growth. So reason number 1, this is the one that all of you have been waiting for in suspense. Reason number 1 why you should invest in Indonesia is that if we don't get new investments from this is very serious. If you don't get new investment from America, the new ambassador will be sent back and become a dishwasher again. And I can't bear that. I got 3 children. So please invest in Indonesia, and I look forward to meeting all of you again. Thank you very much. Reason number 1 compelling enough?
Yeah, we like that. That's great.
Thank you.
Very nice, very nice. Thank you very much, Ambassador. We do not have the panel 3 scheduled to start until 2:15, so we have some time on our schedule now for people to disperse. If you can find your way out of here, and if you can find your way back, feel free to leave. But 2:15 is when we'll reconvene. There's still some coffee outside, so you're welcome to stay in here and continue discussions, or take a break and walk around the building. But we'll be commencing.